I have told this story maybe 1,000 times now, to my children and their children, to scholars who came with their recording devices, to young soldiers who wanted to know if it was true. And every time, I start it the same way, because it is the only honest way to start it. We did not believe they would come. You have to understand that first before anything else, or the rest of it will mean nothing to you. When my people sent the call out into the dark, we did not believe anyone would answer. We sent it the way a drowning creature cries out, not because it expects rescue, but because the crying is the last thing left to do. We sent it into the silence between the stars, and we expected silence to answer, because silence had always answered before. My name in the closest sound your language can make of it is Teller. That is not the name my mother gave me. My true name does not fit in a human mouth, and besides, I earned the name Teller, and I am prouder of it than of anything I was born with. I am the one who tells it. I was there. I saw the sky fill up, and I am very old now, old enough that the telling has become the main work of my days, and I want to get it right one more time before I cannot tell it anymore. So, let me take you back. Let me take you to my world before the humans came, when we still believed we were alone in our suffering. My world is called Veth. You would find it beautiful, I think, though you would also find it strange. We are a people of the shallow seas and the long coasts. My kind, we have no good word for it in your tongue, so I will simply say my people. We live where the water meets the land, in cities built half in the tide and half on the cliffs above it. We breathe air, but we are born in water, and we return to the water to rest. And the sound of the sea is the first sound any of us ever hears and the last sound most of us ever hear. Picture it. Long pale beaches under a violet sky, because our sun is a small hot blue-white star, and the light it throws is not like your light. Cliffs rising up from the water, honeycombed with the openings of our dwellings, so that a city looks from the sea like a great cliff full of glowing eyes at night. The tide comes in twice a day, very fast, very high, and the lower city floods and empties with it, and we built everything to live with that rhythm. Our markets and our gathering halls and our shrines all designed to be half drowned and then revealed again, twice a day forever. The sounds. I want you to hear the sounds, because the sounds are what I miss most about the world that existed before. The tide, always the tide, rushing up the channels between the buildings. The calls of the shore gliders wheeling over the water at dusk. The deep humming songs my people sing, we sing constantly. It is how we speak across distance. Our voices carry over water in a way that words alone cannot. So that a city at evening is full of overlapping song, thousands of voices weaving in and out. A sound like the sea itself had learned to grieve and to celebrate. We were not a powerful people. I want to be clear about that. We were not warriors. We had cities and art and long memory and beautiful songs, but we had never needed weapons because we had never had enemies. We were alone on our world, the only thinking creatures in all those shallow seas, and we had been alone for all of our history, and we had made a kind of peace with that loneliness. We thought it was the natural order of things. We thought thinking creatures were rare and scattered, and that we would live and die having never met another mind that was not our own kind. We were wrong about that. We learned we were not alone. We learned it in the worst possible way. The cull came when I was young, younger than I am telling this story to most of you who hear it. I was barely past my naming tide, which is the time when a young one of my people leaves the water nurseries and takes their place among the adults. I was full of myself, the way the young are. I thought I understood the world. I thought the world was the cities and the tide and the songs, and that it would go on being those things forever. Then the sky changed. I remember the night it started, because everyone of my generation remembers it. We all tell the same thing when we speak of it. We all remember exactly where we were when the new stars appeared, because that is what it looked like at first. New stars. A scattering of hard, bright points appearing in the violet sky where no stars had been, growing slowly brighter over many nights, and at first our astronomers were delighted. Imagine that. They were delighted. They thought they were witnessing some new celestial phenomenon, a gift to study. They climbed their towers and sang to each other across the cities about the wonderful new lights in the sky. The lights were ships. The lights were a fleet decelerating into our system, growing brighter as they came because they were coming toward us. And by the time our astronomers understood what they were truly looking at, the ships were already in orbit above Veth, and it was already far, far too late. I do not know the true name of the people who came to cull us. We never learned it. They never told us anything. They did not come to talk. We called them in our songs after the silent ones, because in all the long horror of what they did to us, they never once spoke to us, never explained, never demanded, never offered terms. They simply arrived and looked at our world and began, methodically, patiently, without any apparent feeling at all, to empty it. That is the only word for what they did. They emptied us. They came down in great gray landing craft on the beaches in the flooded lower cities, and they took my people. Not to kill, that was the horror of it, that would almost have been kinder, but to take. To gather us up and carry us away into the dark, for purposes we never understood and that I do not let myself imagine even now. Workers, perhaps, specimens, worse things. We do not know. We only know that the landing craft came down full of soldiers and went back up full of my screaming people, and then came down again, and again, tide after tide, day after day, and the silent ones did this with the calm, bored efficiency of someone gathering shellfish from the rocks at low water. To them we were shellfish. We understood that very quickly. To them we were a resource, a harvest. They had found a world full of thinking creatures who had no weapons and no defenses and no friends, and they had done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said, "Take them." So they took us. I will not tell you everything about the years of the cull. Some of it I cannot tell, even now, even to you. I lost most of the people I loved in those years. My mother, my nest siblings, the one I had begun the long courtship songs with before any of it, who I would have shared the rest of my tides with, gone, taken, in the 3rd year, from a beach I had begged her not to go to. I sang for her across the water for 9 days and she never sang back, and on the 10th day I understood she never would. I tell you this not to make you grieve for me. It was long ago and I have done my grieving, and a creature my age has made peace with its ghosts, or it has not survived to be my age. I tell you because I need you to understand the shape of us when the call went out. I need you to understand that we were a broken people, a hunted people. A people who had spent years being emptied from our own world by something we could not fight and could not flee and could not even speak to, and who had learned in those years the deepest lesson that the weak ever learn. No one is coming. No one is coming. You are alone in the dark and the dark does not care and no one is coming. That was what we believed. That was the truth we had been taught beach by beach, tide by tide for 7 years. No one is coming. And so when the elders gathered in the 8th year, in the deep flooded sanctuary beneath the oldest city, and proposed that we send a call for help out into the dark, most of us thought they had lost their minds to grief. Let me tell you about the call, because the call is where the real story begins, and because I was there for it, which is a thing I am still amazed by. By the 8th year, we were perhaps 1/10 of what we had been, maybe less. The silent ones had emptied the great coastal cities first, and the survivors had fled inland, to the high cliffs and the cold, deep waters where the landing craft came less often, and we lived there like the hunted animals we had become, in hidden sanctuaries in the dark, singing very quietly so the sky would not hear us. I had become, by then, something between a messenger and a scout. I was young and quick, and I had learned to move along the coasts without being seen, and so I carried word between the hidden sanctuaries, and I was carrying word the night the elders made their decision. That is why I was there. Pure chance. I had come to the deep sanctuary with news from the northern cliffs, and I arrived in the middle of the great argument, and I stayed to listen because I could not have torn myself away. The elders were divided. Most of them wanted to do nothing, not because they were cowards, but because they were afraid that any signal, any cry, would only draw the silent ones down on the last of us. We had survived this long by being silent. Why break the silence now? Why risk the last tenth of our people on a cry into the dark that no one would answer? But there was one elder, her name in your sounds was something like Arrow, who stood up out of the water in the center of the sanctuary, and she sang the thing that changed everything. She was very old, older than I am now, and she had lost even more than I had, and when she sang, the whole sanctuary went still, because grief that deep has a kind of authority to it. She sang, "We have been silent for 7 years, and silence has saved a tenth of us, and in 7 more years silence will save none of us. Silence is not survival. Silence is only a slower emptying. I would rather cry out and be heard by the wrong ears than stay silent and be emptied to the last child. Send the call. Let us at least die having asked. Let us at least put the question to the dark. Is there anyone? Is there anyone at all who will come? And if the answer is no, and it will likely be no, then at least we will know at the end that we asked, that we did not simply let ourselves be taken in silence. We asked." And the strange thing, the thing I have thought about for the rest of my long life, is that she did not promise anyone would come. She did not say help will arrive. She said the opposite. She said it will likely be no. She offered nothing but the dignity of having asked. And that was enough. That was somehow enough to turn the whole sanctuary, because we were a people who had lost everything except the question, and she gave us permission to ask it. We sent the call. You should understand what sending the call meant, because it was not a simple thing. We had no real technology for it. We were a people of the sea and the song. We had never built the great star-speaking machines that some peoples build, but the silent ones had left wreckage. In 7 years of culling, a few of their landing craft had been lost to storms, to the deep tides, once to a desperate group of my people who had brought one down with nothing but their own bodies and their own deaths. And in that wreckage were machines we did not understand, but that some of our cleverest survivors had spent years learning to coax into life. One of those machines could speak to the stars. We were almost sure of it. We had watched the silent ones use it in the early days, before we understood enough to be hiding. We had seen them send their signals up into the dark, reporting their harvest, calling for more ships. So we knew the machine could throw a voice across the void. We just did not know how to make it say what we wanted it to say. It took the cleverest of us most of a year to work it out. A survivor named Esau of the Deep Current, who had been an instrument maker before the call, who understood machines the way the rest of us understood song. She led the work. She and a small band of others took the salvaged star speaker into the deepest sanctuary, and they studied it, and they learned its logic the way you learn a stranger's language, by patience and failure and starting again. And at the end of that year they came to the elders and said, "We can make it speak. We can throw a voice into the dark. But we have to choose what it says, and we have only the smallest understanding of the speech the stars use, and we will likely only get one clear cry before the silent ones notice and silence us. So we must choose our words as if they are the last words of our entire people, because they may be." Imagine that. Imagine having one cry, one signal into all the vast indifferent dark, knowing that anyone might hear it, including the very monsters who were hunting you, and that you would likely never get to send another. What do you say? How do you compress an entire people's anguish and hope and dignity into a single cry, in a language you barely understand, aimed at no one, at everyone, at the whole black uncaring void? The elders argued about it for many tides, and in the end, they did something I have always thought was the wisest and the most desperate thing my people ever did. They did not try to write the message in the stars' own language. They knew they would get it wrong. Instead, Esau built the message out of 3 things, 3 layers, like a song built in 3 voices. The first layer was a map. Simply that, the location of our world, our system, drawn in the universal language of stars and their positions, so that anyone who heard would know where. The second layer was a record. Images, sounds, the things the salvaged machine had captured, the Silent One's landing craft, the emptying of the beaches, our people being taken. The horror documented, not described because we lacked the words, simply shown, so that anyone who heard would know what. And the third layer was the one that mattered, the one I think reached across the dark and took hold of something in the hearts that finally heard it. The third layer was song. Isa recorded our songs, not war songs because we had none, not even cries for help exactly. She recorded our ordinary songs, the songs we sang at evening across the water, the songs we sang to our young in the nurseries, the songs of courtship and of mourning and of the simple daily beauty of the tide coming in. She recorded a people, being alive and gentle and full of love and loss and worth saving. She did not try to argue that we deserved help. She simply showed in song what we were, what would be lost, what the dark would be emptier without. And then at the very end, the simplest possible plea in the simplest possible form, Esau managed to learn just enough of the stars' common speech to append 3 words, just 3. The 3 words that every thinking creature in the galaxy, it turns out, understands, no matter how strange their language, no matter how distant their world. Is anyone there? That was the call. A map, a horror, a song, and a question. Here is where we are. Here is what is being done to us. Here is what we are. Is anyone there? We sent it on a high tide at night, under the violet sky crowded with the hard, bright stars of the Silent One's fleet. Esau fed the message into the salvaged machine, and the machine gathered itself and threw our whole people's voice up into the dark in a single pulse. And then it burned out. It could only do it once, exactly as we had feared, and went dark and silent forever. And we waited, and we expected nothing, because no one was coming. Everyone knew no one was coming. We had been taught that lesson very thoroughly. No one comes. You are alone in the dark. We were about to learn that the lesson was a lie. I want to tell you about the waiting, because the waiting was its own kind of terrible, and because of what it did to Arrow, the old elder who had argued for the call. She died during the waiting. Not violently, she was simply very old and she had held on, I think, just long enough to see the call sent, and then she let go. I was with her at the end in the deep sanctuary because I had grown close to her in the months after the call. I had taken to bringing her news, and she had taken to telling me the old stories, the histories from before the call, the things she did not want to die with no one remembering. In her last tide she asked me to sing to her, and I did. I sang the evening songs, the ordinary ones, the ones Esau had recorded and sent into the dark. And Arrow listened, floating in the dark water of the sanctuary, and when I had finished she was quiet for a long time, and then she sang back to me very softly, the last thing she ever sang. She sang, "I will not live to know the answer, but you will tell her, though I was not called teller yet, that came later, you will live to know whether the dark answered us. And whatever the answer is, I want you to remember this. We asked. When we had nothing left, when every reason said to stay silent and be emptied, we found the courage to ask. That is not nothing. That is perhaps the bravest thing a broken people can do. To still believe against all the evidence that the question is worth asking. To still hope when hope is foolish. Remember that we asked. Whatever comes, remember that we were brave enough to ask." And then she sang one more line. The line I have carved over the door of every dwelling I have lived in since. The line I want carved over my own resting place when my last tide comes. She sang, "The dark is very large, but it is not empty. I have to believe it is not empty. Promise me you will believe it too." And I promised. And she let go, and the tide took her, the way it takes all of us at the end, back into the water that bore us. I did not know that night that the dark had already answered. I did not know that, far away, in a system whose name I could not have pronounced, the call had already been heard, that it had reached exactly the kind of ears that old Arrow had hoped, against all hope, might be listening. I did not know that the humans had already turned toward us. This is the part of the story where I have to tell you about creatures I had never seen, on a world I had never imagined, making a choice I did not witness. I have pieced it together over the long years since, from the humans themselves, from their records, from 100 tellings and retellings. So forgive me if I tell it as if I were there. I have heard it so many times that it feels as if I were. The call from Veth traveled a long time through the dark, years. It went out in every direction, the way such cries do, growing fainter as it spread, and most of it spread into emptiness and was lost. But a thread of it, one faint thread, reached a system far from ours, a system with a yellow sun and a blue and white world, a world absolutely crawling with a young, loud, restless, dangerous people who had only recently learned to throw their own voices into the dark, and who were, as it happened, listening. They were listening because they were lonely. That is the thing I learned about humans that surprised me most, the thing that explained everything else about them. They had come up into the galaxy only recently in the long count of things, and they had spent their whole brief history wondering if they were alone, staring up at their sky and asking the same question we had appended to our call, is anyone there? And getting, for all their listening, only silence. They had built great machines for catching whispers from the dark, and they had pointed those machines at the sky, and they had waited, the way we had waited, for an answer. And one day the answer came, except the answer was not hello. The answer was not a greeting from some friendly distant people. The answer was a map and a horror and a song and a question. Here is where we are. Here is what is being done to us. Here is what we are. Is anyone there? I have spoken with humans who were alive when the call arrived at their world. I have asked them what it was like, and every one of them told me a version of the same thing, which is this. The call broke their hearts, and then it made them angry, and the anger is what saved us. The map and the horror, they told me, made the humans furious, a cold, terrible fury at the casual emptying of a gentle people. But it was the song that did it. It was the third layer, the one Esau had built out of our ordinary evening songs and our nursery songs and our songs of courtship and grief. The humans heard our songs, heard a people, being alive and gentle and full of love, the very thing that was being taken from the universe, beach by beach, tide by tide, and something in them. Some deep, strange thing that I have come to believe is the truest thing about humans, simply refused. One of them said it to me this way, years later, an old human soldier with white in his hair. When I asked him why they came, he said, "We'd been listening to that sky our whole history, hoping somebody was out there. And the first time somebody finally answered, it was a cry for help from people being hunted to extinction. People who sang to their kids the same way we sing to ours. And you want to know what we thought? We thought, not while we're here. We finally find out we're not alone, and the not alone is being murdered. No, absolutely not. Not on our watch. Not on our watch." He said it so simply, as if it were obvious, as if any people hearing such a call would have done the same. They would not have. I know now that they would not have. Most people's hearing that call would have done the arithmetic the silent ones did, would have noted that Veth was far away and not their concern, and that getting involved meant making a powerful enemy for the sake of strangers. Most peoples would have stayed silent, the way the dark had always stayed silent. The humans were not most peoples. The humans heard a cry in the dark, and they did the maddest, most beautiful, most dangerous thing, the thing that should terrify every predator in the galaxy. They came. But they did not come quietly, and they did not come as rescuers slipping in to evacuate a few survivors. That was not the human way. I learned that too. When humans answer a call, they answer it with everything they are. There was an argument among them first, of course. There is always an argument among humans. It is, I have come to understand, simply how they think, out loud in a great quarrelsome crowd all at once. The cautious ones argued that Veth was far away, that the silent ones were clearly powerful, that humanity was young and not strong enough to pick a fight with an unknown culling power across the stars. The cautious ones argued that the responsible thing was to study the call, to send a small, careful scout, to gather information, to consider. And the others, and this is the part I love, this is the part that is so very human, the others said, while we consider, they are being emptied. While we study and scout and gather information, a child of theirs is being carried up into the dark on every tide. There is no responsible amount of time to spend deciding whether to save a drowning people. You jump in or you watch them drown. There is no third thing. What turned the argument in the end was not strategy. It was the song. The humans played the call to their whole world. They did that. They let everyone hear it. Every human alive heard our songs and our horror and our question. And once a whole world has heard a gentle people being hunted to death and asking, is anyone there? You cannot unhear it, and you cannot look your own children in the eye and tell them you decided to study the problem. The song made it impossible to do nothing. The song reached across all those years and all that dark, and took hold of an entire human world by the heart, and would not let go. So they came. And because they were afraid, I want to honor that they were not fearless. They were a young people going to war across the stars against an enemy they did not understand, and they were terrified. Because they were afraid, they did not come with a few ships. They came with everything. They emptied their shipyards. They armed every vessel that could be armed and crewed every vessel that could be crewed. They built new ships in a fever, faster than anyone thought ships could be built, and they trained crews for them, and they gathered in the space of 2 years the largest fleet their young species had ever assembled, far larger than anything they had ever needed for themselves. All of it, every ship, pointed at a world most of them could not find on a star chart, for the sake of a people none of them had ever met. They came because we asked. They came in overwhelming force because they had decided that if they were going to answer a cry for help, they were going to answer it so completely, so finally, that the dark would never again think a gentle people could be emptied while humanity was listening. They were coming. Across all that dark for years the human fleet was coming. And we, on Veth, had no idea. We had sent our one cry, and it had burned out our one machine. And old Arrow had died believing the dark was not empty but never knowing if she was right. And the rest of us had gone back to our hiding and our silence and our slow emptying, certain that no one had heard, certain that no one was coming. We were wrong. Oh, we were so wrong. The most wonderful wrong a broken people has ever been. Let me tell you about the night the dark answered. I have told it 1,000 times, and I have never once told it without my voice shaking, and I am too old now to pretend that will be different tonight. So bear with an old creature's trembling. Some things you do not get to tell calmly, no matter how many years go by. It was 3 years after we sent the call. 3 years. We had stopped counting the days toward an answer long before. What would we even have been counting toward? We had no idea how far our cry had traveled, or whether it had reached anything, or how long help might take if help were even coming, which we were certain it was not. Old Arrow was 3 years dead. Esau, who had built the call, had been taken in the 2nd year after, on a beach she should not have been on, and I had sung for her across the water for 9 days the way I had sung for the one I loved, and she had not sung back either. We were fewer than ever, perhaps 1/20th of what we had once been. The silent ones were patient. They were in no hurry. They had a whole world to empty and all the time in the dark to do it, and they were doing it, tide by tide, with the same calm boredom they had shown from the very first day. I had become, by then, the keeper of the northern sanctuary. Arrow's death and Esau's death and 100 other deaths had moved me up the long, sad ladder of survival until I, who had been a young messenger barely past my naming tide when the cull began, was now one of the elders of my people, not because I was wise, but because I was still alive, which had become the only qualification that mattered. I kept the northern sanctuary, deep in the cold waters under the high cliffs, where perhaps 400 of us still hid, and I rationed our hope the way we rationed everything else, which is to say I tried to make sure no one had too much of it, because hope had become a dangerous thing. Hope got you killed. Hope made you careless. The ones who survived were the ones who had stopped hoping and learned to simply endure. That was who we were, the night the dark answered. Endurers. A people who had given up on rescue and made a grim, cold peace with being slowly emptied from our own world. And then, on an ordinary night, under the violet sky crowded with the hard, bright stars of the Silent One's fleet, the sky tore open. I was on the high cliff that night. I should not have been. It was dangerous, exposed. The landing craft sometimes swept the cliffs at night, but I had taken to going up there in the dark hours alone to look at the sky. It was a foolish habit, and I knew it was foolish, and I did it anyway because of Arrow, because of her last song. The dark is very large, but it is not empty. Promise me you will believe it too. I had promised. And keeping that promise, 3 years on, had come down to this one foolish thing. Going up to the high cliff in the dark, alone and looking at the sky, and trying to still believe it was not empty, even though every single thing in my life had taught me that it was. So I was looking at the sky when it tore open. I was the keeper of the northern sanctuary, looking up at the stars and trying to believe an old dead woman's last hope, and I saw it happen with my own eyes, before anyone else of my people saw it, and I will be grateful for that for the rest of my tides. Of all of us, I got to see it first. It began as a wrongness in the dark. That is the only way I can describe it. The space between the stars, the deep black between the hard, bright points of the Silent One's fleet, began to shimmer in places, in dozens of places, in hundreds, like heat shimmer over the sand at midday, like the surface of the water seen from below. The dark itself seemed to ripple and strain, and I remember I stopped breathing. I remember every part of me went perfectly still, because I had never seen the sky do anything like it, and some deep animal part of me knew that something enormous was about to happen. And then the dark broke, and the ships came through. I had seen ships before. Understand that. I was not a creature who had never looked upon a vessel of the void. I had spent 7 years watching the Silent One's fleet hang in our sky, watching their gray landing craft come down and go up, come down and go up. I knew what ships looked like. I did not know what this looked like. Nothing in my life had prepared me for this. They came out of the shimmer in their hundreds, in their thousands. Ship after ship after ship, tearing out of the folded dark and into the space above my world. More ships than I had names for numbers. More ships than I had ever imagined existing in all the galaxy combined. They came out of the dark in a great spreading wave, and they kept coming, and they kept coming, until the violet sky above Veth was no longer a sky with stars in it, but a sky with a ceiling. A vast roof of vessels, layer upon layer of them, filling the dark from horizon to horizon, blotting out the hard, bright stars of the Silent One's fleet entirely, replacing them with the running lights of more ships than my entire people had ever built in all our history combined. I stood on the high cliff and I looked up at a sky that had become a fleet, and I could not understand what I was seeing. My mind refused it. It was too large. It was the kind of thing the mind simply slides off of, unable to take hold. I thought in those first few moments that I had finally gone mad, that the years of grief and hiding had broken something in me, and that I was seeing a vision, a hallucination, the impossible thing a broken mind conjures when it can no longer bear the real. And then the human ships began to sing. I have to stop here, because this is the part that no telling has ever done justice to, and I'm about to fail at it again, but I have to try. When the human fleet arrived above Veth, it did not arrive in silence. The humans, I would learn much later, had studied our call obsessively in the years of their coming. They had listened to Esau's 3-layered song 10,000 times, every human in the fleet, until they knew it better than we knew it ourselves. And they understood somehow, with that strange, deep human intuition, that the 3rd layer was the heart of it, that we were a people of song. That song was how we spoke across distance, how we knew one another, how we declared ourselves alive. So when they came, they sang back. The human ships broadcast it down through the atmosphere on every frequency, in a way that bypassed the air and vibrated in the cliffs themselves, in the water, in the bones of every one of my people across the whole hidden, hunted world. And what they broadcast was our own song, Esau's recording, the evening songs, the nursery songs, the songs of courtship and grief and the simple daily beauty of the tide coming in, the ordinary songs of an ordinary people, the songs we had sent into the dark as our last cry, the songs we had been too frightened to sing aloud for 7 years for fear the sky would hear us. The sky sang them back to us. The whole human fleet, thousands of ships, sang our own songs back down to us, across the violet night, so that every hidden survivor in every drowned sanctuary on Veth heard, suddenly, impossibly, their own people's voice pouring down from a sky full of strangers' ships. It was a message, and the message was the simplest and most complete message one people has ever sent another. It said, "We heard you. We heard your song. We learned it by heart. We came. You are not alone. You were never alone. We are here." I fell down on the cliff. My legs simply stopped holding me. I lay there on the cold stone with the sky singing my people's songs back at me in the voices of strangers, and I wept the way I have only wept a few times in my long life, the deep helpless weeping that comes from somewhere underneath the self, and all I could think over and over, the only thought I had room for was Arrow. Arrow, you were right. Arrow, the dark is not empty. Arrow, they came, they actually came, you were right, you were right. She had been dead 3 years, she never knew. But I knew in that moment, lying on the cliff under the singing sky, that she had been right, and that her last hope had not been foolish after all, and that the bravest thing a broken people can do, to still ask, to still believe, when belief is foolish, had been answered. The dark had answered. It had only taken 3 years and a young, loud, lonely people who had been waiting their whole history to hear exactly such a cry. The silent ones did not understand what was happening to them. I want to tell you about that because it matters, because it is the heart of why humanity's answer terrified the galaxy and not just one culling power. The silent ones had been emptying worlds for a very long time. We learned that later. We were not their first world, and we were not meant to be their last. They had a method, and their method had worked for longer than my people had existed, and the method was built on one foundational truth that had never once failed them. The weak are alone. That was the whole of it. That was the rock their entire civilization was built upon. They hunted the weak, the small peoples, the gentle peoples, the ones without weapons or fleets or friends, and they hunted them precisely because the weak were alone, because no one came for the weak, because the strong did not trouble themselves over the emptying of some distant gentle people they had never met. The silent ones had emptied 100 worlds, 1,000 worlds, on the unshakable certainty that no one would ever come. They did not even bother to speak to their victims, did not bother to explain or threaten or demand, because why would you speak to shellfish? Why would you explain yourself to the harvest? The harvest does not have friends. The harvest is alone. That was the truth they had built everything on. And on that night above Veth, for the first time in their long, patient, bloody history, that truth failed. Someone came for the weak. I cannot tell you what the silent ones felt, because we never understood their minds and they never spoke, not even at the end. But I can tell you what they did, and what they did told the whole story. When the human fleet tore out of the dark above Veth in its thousands, the silent one's fleet, which had hung in our sky for 10 years in calm, bored, unchallenged safety, panicked. There is no other word for it. We watched it happen from the cliffs and the sanctuaries. The hard, bright stars of their fleet, which had never once needed to move quickly, which had hung there with the lazy confidence of a predator that has never been prey, they scattered. They scrambled. They flung themselves into a defensive formation they had clearly never had real cause to practice, against an enemy they had never in their entire history had to imagine, and you could feel, even from the ground, even across all that distance, the sheer disbelief of it. the certainty that had held their whole civilization together for longer than memory. The weak are alone. No one comes was shattering above our heads in real time, and they did not know how to exist in a universe where it was no longer true. The humans, I think, understood this perfectly. The humans had spent their whole brief history being the small, young, possibly alone people staring up at an indifferent sky. They knew exactly what it was to be the weak who feared no one would ever come. And so they knew, with a kind of ferocious instinct, exactly how to break a predator whose entire power rested on the loneliness of its prey. You break such a predator by not being alone anymore. You break it by coming. You break it by arriving in such overwhelming, unmistakable, sky-filling force that every other predator in the galaxy, watching from the dark, and they were watching, they were all watching, understands, in a single night, that the old rule is dead, that the weak are not alone anymore, that somewhere out in the dark there is now a young, loud, dangerous people who listen and who come with everything for the sake of strangers because they were asked. That was the message of the fleet. The fleet itself was the message. It said to the silent ones and to every culling power in the galaxy, the hunting is over. The weak have a friend now, and the friend is terrifying. But I am getting ahead of myself into the meaning when you want the night itself. Forgive an old creature. Let me come back down to the cliff and the water and the things I saw with my own eyes. The battle, when it came, was not long. I have spoken to humans who fought in it, and they have told me it was one of the strangest battles they ever fought, because the silent ones, for all their long history of harvesting, did not really know how to fight. They knew how to empty an undefended world. They had never had to fight a defended one, because they had been so careful for so long to only ever pick worlds that could not fight back. They had weapons, yes, terrible weapons, the weapons they used to cow and capture my people. But they had never had to use those weapons against an enemy that shot back, an enemy that was ready, an enemy that had spent 2 years building and training and preparing for exactly this, an enemy that wanted the fight. The humans wanted the fight. That was the thing the silent ones had never faced and could not comprehend. The humans had come across all that dark looking for this, hungry for it, full of a cold, clean fury at what had been done to a gentle singing people, and when the two fleets met above Veth, the humans fell on the silent ones with everything they had and everything they were. I watched it from the cliff. I will not pretend I understood what I was seeing. It was vast and fast and far above me, lights blooming and dying in the dark, whole ships becoming brief suns, and then nothing. The violet sky lit up over and over with the silent flares of distant deaths. It was beautiful and it was horrible, and it was happening for us, for my people, for the 400 frightened survivors in the sanctuary below me and the scattered thousands like them across the world. Strangers were dying in the sky above my head, in their hundreds, perhaps their thousands, dying for a people they had never met because we had asked and they had heard. And they had decided that not while we're here was reason enough to cross the dark and bleed. And the silent ones who had never bled, who had never lost, who had spent 1,000 years certain that the weak were alone and safe to take, the silent ones broke. It did not take long. Once they understood that they could not win, once the old certainty had shattered and the new terrible truth had taken its place, they did the only thing a predator does when it finally meets something stronger than itself. They tried to run. The hard, bright stars of their fleet began to pull away from Veth, scrambling back toward the folded dark they had come from, abandoning the harvest, abandoning the landing craft still on the surface, abandoning even their own soldiers on the beaches, in a desperate scattering flight. The humans did not let most of them go. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not pretend I am sorry. The humans pursued them and ran them down and finished it, because the humans had not crossed all that dark to drive the silent ones off for a season and let them return to their harvesting once humanity went home. The humans had come to end it, to make the lesson permanent, to make sure that the silent ones never emptied another beach on another gentle world ever again. and they did. By the time the violet sky began to pale toward the blue-white dawn, the fleet that had hung over my world for 10 years was gone, destroyed, scattered. The few survivors fled into the dark with nothing but the knowledge of what had happened to them, which the humans, I think, let them carry on purpose. Let them flee, those few, so that they would tell the others, so that the lesson would spread. The hunting was over. We did not quite believe it yet, but the hunting was over. And then the humans came down. This is the part I have to tell carefully, because for my people it was the most frightening and the most wonderful moment of the entire war. And the two feelings were so tangled together that even now I cannot fully separate them. We had spent 10 years watching gray landing craft come down out of the sky. 10 years. To us, a craft descending from the sky onto our beaches meant one thing and one thing only: the emptying, the taking, the end. That association was burned into every one of us so deeply that it was no longer a thought but a reflex, a thing in the body, in the blood. When something comes down from the sky, you hide, you flee, you scream. You watch your loved ones be carried up into the dark. So when the human landing craft began to descend, and they were not gray, they were marked with strange bright colors and stranger symbols, but they were still craft, descending from the sky. Every instinct in every one of my people screamed, "Run, hide, it is the emptying, it is the end." I felt it myself, even me, even on that cliff, even having just watched the human fleet destroy our hunters and sing our own songs back to us. The body does not listen to the mind. The body saw craft descending, and the body said, "Run." But we did not run. And I want to tell you why we did not run, because it is, I think, the most human thing in this whole story of humans, even though it was a thing that my people did. We did not run because the humans were still singing. The whole way down, through the whole descent, every landing craft all across the world, the humans kept broadcasting our songs. They came down out of the sky exactly the way the silent ones had, into the same beaches, the same drowned cities, the same places where we had been emptied for 10 years. But they came down singing our songs, and that was the difference, and it was the difference between terror and salvation. They had understood somehow, with that deep, strange human wisdom, that a people conditioned for 10 years to flee the descending sky could only be reached one way: by making the descending sky sing to them in their own voice, by making it unmistakable in the deepest pre-thought layer of the body that this was different, that this sky meant something new. And so when the human craft came down on the beaches of Veth, my people did not flee into the deep water. We crept out of our sanctuaries instead, drawn by our own songs pouring down from the descending craft, and we gathered on the beaches in the blue-white dawn, in our hidden frightened thousands, and we watched the landing craft open. And the humans came out. I was not on a beach for the first landing. I was still on my cliff, watching from above. But I came down after. I made my way down to the northern beach where one of the great human craft had settled, because I was the keeper of the northern sanctuary, and it was my place to be the first of my people to face whatever had come. And so I went down, trembling in every limb, expecting I knew not what. The humans were smaller than I had imagined. That was my first thought, my first foolish thought, standing on the beach in the dawn looking at the creatures who had crossed the dark to save us. They were smaller than the silent ones, smaller than I had pictured the makers of that sky-filling fleet. They walked on two legs and they had soft, strange faces and they wore armor, but the armor was not the cruel armor of the silent ones. It was bright, marked, almost gentle-looking, and they had set their weapons down. That was the thing I noticed, the thing that undid me. They had come out of their craft with their weapons lowered or set aside entirely, and they were holding their soft, strange hands open and empty, palms up, in a gesture I did not understand but whose meaning my body grasped before my mind did. We are not here to take. See our open hands. We are not here to take. And one of them came forward, alone, ahead of the others, and stopped a little distance from me, and looked at me with its strange, soft eyes. And then it did the thing that I have never been able to tell without weeping, and I am weeping now, telling it to you. It sang. Not perfectly. Its voice was not made for our songs. It was rough and wrong, and it stumbled over the long-held tones that come so easily to us. But it sang, a human, alone on a beach in the dawn, sang to me, badly and bravely, one of our evening songs. The simplest one. The one we sing to say the day is ending and we are still here and we are together, and that is enough. It had learned our song, this creature from across the dark. It had learned our song by heart and crossed all that emptiness, and now it stood on my beach and sang it to me, badly, with its whole heart, as a greeting, as a promise, as a way of saying the only thing that mattered in any language. You are not alone. I sang back. Of course I sang back. What else does a creature do when the dark itself has learned its song and come to sing it on its beach at dawn? I sang back, and my voice was not rough. My voice was the voice of a people who had sung across these waters for 10,000 years, and the human strange soft eyes did something then. They filled with water, I saw it. The human wept too, standing on my beach, hearing me sing back, and all down the beach as the song rose, my people came out of their hiding, out of the rocks and the shallows and the deep water. Hundreds of them, thousands, drawn by the song, and they joined it voice by voice. Until the whole beach was singing, my people and the rough-voiced humans together, the evening song at dawn. On the morning the hunting ended. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. I have lived a very long life and heard a great many beautiful things, and nothing has ever come close. A broken people and the strangers who came when they asked, standing together on a beach in the blue-white dawn, singing. That is the arrival. That is the night the dark answered and the morning the hunting ended. But the story is not over, the story of what it meant is not over, and there is one more part to tell, the part about who the Silent Ones truly were, and why humanity's answer reshaped the whole galaxy, and what became of Veth and of the survivors and of me. And there is the matter of Old Arrow's last song, and whether I kept my promise, which I will tell you about at the end, because it is the truest thing I know. But before I go on to all of that, I want to leave you for tonight with one more thing the humans did. Because it is the thing that tells you who they truly were, underneath all the ships and all the fury. After the battle, after the landings, after the singing on the beaches, after all of it, when it was clear that the Silent Ones were gone and the hunting was over and my people were impossibly saved, the human commander came to our elders, to what was left of our elders, and we braced ourselves. Because we knew how these things go. We were a people who had learned very thoroughly that the strong take from the weak. We had been emptied by one strong people. Now another, far stronger, stood upon our beaches with the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen, and we waited to learn the price. We waited to learn what humanity wanted from us in exchange for our salvation. Tribute. Submission, our world, ourselves, something. There is always a price. The strong always take. The human commander, a tired old human with white in her hair, who had crossed the dark and won a war for strangers, looked at our frightened gathered elders, and she seemed to understand exactly what we were braced for, and a great sadness came over her strange, soft face. And through the machines that turned her words into our song, she said the thing that I have carried in my heart for the rest of my life, the thing that finally, completely, broke the old lesson the Silent Ones had taught us. She said, "You don't owe us anything. That's not why we came. We came because you asked, and because someone has to answer, and because we couldn't stand the thought of you being alone out here. That's the whole of it. There's no price. There was never going to be a price. We just, and here, they tell me, the old human's voice broke and she had to stop and begin again. We just didn't want you to be alone anymore. That's all. That's all it ever was. No price after everything, no price." We did not know what to do with that. A people who had learned that the strong always take, faced with the strong who had crossed the dark to give, and asked for nothing. It did not fit in our understanding of the universe. It broke our understanding of the universe. And that, I think, that breaking was the beginning of who my people became after. the beginning of the world that grew up out of the ashes of the old one. But that is the next part of the story. There is a thing that happens to a people who have been saved, and no one ever warns you about it. And I want to warn you, because it is the truest and the hardest part of this whole story. When you have spent 10 years being emptied, when you have made a cold, grim peace with the certainty that no one is coming and that your whole world will end in silence, and that the only choice left to you is whether to endure your ending with a little dignity or none at all. And then, on a single impossible night, the dark answers and the strangers come, and the hunting ends, and you are saved. You do not at first feel joy. That is the thing no one tells you. You would think joy. You would think we fell on our knees in the surf and wept with happiness and never stopped. And we did weep, yes, on the beaches in the dawn, singing. But after, in the days and the tides and the long seasons after, what most of us felt was not joy. It was something stranger and much harder. It was the slow, terrible thawing of a people who had frozen themselves solid in order to survive, and who now, in the warmth of safety, had to feel everything they had not let themselves feel for 10 years. All the grief we had postponed, all the loved ones we had not had time to mourn, because mourning got you killed, because the next tide always brought the next emptying and you had to keep moving, keep hiding, keep enduring. We had buried our grief alive, all of us, for 10 years, because grief was a luxury the hunted cannot afford. And now we were not hunted anymore. And the grief came up out of the ground where we had buried it, all of it at once, 10 years of it, and it nearly destroyed us. That is the part of being saved that no one warns you about. The saving is not the end of the suffering. Sometimes the saving is when the real suffering finally has room to begin. We had survived the cull by not feeling it. We survived the peace by finally, at last, allowing ourselves to feel the whole weight of what had been done to us. And it was almost too much. We very nearly did not survive being saved. The humans understood this. I will tell you how they understood it, because it is the thing that made them more than just our rescuers, the thing that made them, in the end, our family. They did not leave. That is the simplest way to say it, and it says everything. After the battle, after the landings, after the singing on the beaches and the commander's no price, the humans did not gather up their enormous fleet and fly home, satisfied having done their good deed. They stayed. Not the whole fleet, the great war fleet did eventually go home, because a young people cannot keep its entire strength parked above one distant world forever. But many of them stayed. Thousands of them. They stayed for years. And they did not stay as conquerors, or as overseers, or as a garrison watching over a conquered people. They stayed as helpers, in the plainest and most patient sense of that word. They had understood, I think, that pulling a people out of the water is only the beginning, that a drowning creature dragged onto the beach still needs warming, still needs tending, still needs someone to sit with it through the long, shaking aftermath. So they sat with us. They stayed and they helped us begin again. They helped us rebuild the drowned cities. Not in their own image, that is important, that is the thing I want you to understand, not in the human image, but in ours. They asked us over and over with a patience that still astonishes me. How was it before? What did it look like? Where did the markets stand, where the gathering halls, where the shrines? Show us, teach us, and we will help you build it back the way it was. They had machines that could move stone and shape coral, and raise a flooded city back up out of the tide in a single season. Machines beyond anything my people had ever dreamed. And they put all of it, all that power, in service of building our world back, the way we remembered it, so that we would have something to hold on to, so that the children would grow up in cities that looked like the cities their grandparents had sung about. And they helped us grieve. That was the harder help and the more important. The humans, it turned out, knew a great deal about grief. They were a people who had suffered in their own history, in ways I will not recount here, but that they told us about freely, around the cooking fires in the evenings. They told us their own histories of loss, their own wars, their own emptied places, so that we would understand that they were not strangers to what we carried. And they helped us build the things a grieving people needs. They helped us build the memorials. They helped us gather the names of the taken, and there were so many names, so very many, and helped us carve them, all of them, every single one, into the long memorial walls that now run for miles along the rebuilt coasts of Veth, so that no one who was emptied from our world would ever be forgotten, so that the silence the silent ones had tried to leave behind would be filled, instead, with names and song. They stayed until we could stand. That is the whole of it. They came when we asked, and then they stayed until we could stand on our own again, and only then did they begin to go home, slowly, a few at a time, with promises to return, promises they kept. They did not save us and leave. They saved us and stayed. And I have come to believe that the staying was the greater gift, greater even than the fleet, greater even than the battle. Anyone with enough ships can win a battle. It takes something deeper to stay through the long, unglamorous aftermath, to sit with a broken people through the slow, terrible work of becoming whole again. The humans had that deeper thing. I do not fully understand where it comes from in them, but they had it and they gave it to us, and we will never be done being grateful. Now, the silent ones. I promised I would tell you who they truly were, and why humanity's answer to one small cry reshaped the whole galaxy, and I will keep that promise, because it is the part that turns this from a story about my people into a story about everyone. We learned the truth slowly in the years after, as humanity reached out into the dark and gathered knowledge and shared it with us. The silent ones were old, far older than humanity, far older than my people. They had been emptying worlds for longer than either of our species had existed. We were not their first world. We were not even their 100th. They had a method, and the method had worked for so long across so many worlds that it had become something like a law of nature, an immovable fact of the galaxy. In the dark places, far from the great powers, the weak get emptied and no one comes, and that is simply how the universe is. Every small, gentle people in the galaxy lived under that law, whether they knew it or not. Every world like mine, every undefended people of song or art or quiet ordinary life, every people without weapons or fleets or powerful friends, lived in the shadow of that certainty. If the harvesters come for us, we are alone and no one will come, and we will be emptied and the dark will not care. It was the deepest fear of every weak people in the galaxy, and it was not an irrational fear because it was true. It had always been true. The silent ones had made it true, world by world, for 10,000 years. And then humanity broke it. In a single night, above one small ocean world that most of the galaxy had never heard of, humanity took the oldest, truest, cruelest law of the dark and shattered it. They proved in front of the whole watching galaxy that the weak were not necessarily alone, that a cry into the dark might in fact be answered, that there now existed, somewhere out there, a young and loud and dangerous people who listened and who came with everything they had for the sake of strangers, asking nothing in return. You cannot imagine what that did. I have spent the rest of my life learning what that did, talking to the envoys of 100 other small peoples who came to Veth in the years after to learn our story, and I will tell you, it changed everything. It changed the whole shape of fear in the galaxy. Because the predator powers and the silent ones were not the only ones, there were others, there are always others. The predator powers had all built their power on the same rock my hunters had built theirs on. The weak are alone. And now, suddenly, that rock was cracked. Now every harvester, every culling power, every strong, cruel thing that fed on the weak in the dark places, had to reckon with a new and terrible possibility. What if they're not alone? What if we empty some small, gentle world and it turns out that world had asked humanity for help, and humanity heard? What if the sky fills up? The few silent ones who fled Veth carried that terror out into the dark, exactly as the humans had intended. They told the others. And the others listened and were afraid, and the fear spread, and it changed how the predators of the dark did their hunting, made them cautious, made them hesitate, made them think twice and 3 times before emptying some small world that might, just might, have a friend now. How many worlds were saved by that hesitation? How many gentle people still sing tonight, on beaches and in forests and under skies I will never see, because the predators that might have emptied them paused and thought of Veth, and of the sky that filled up, and decided the risk was too great. I will never know the number, but I know it is large. I know that humanity's answer to my people's one small cry rippled out across the whole dark galaxy and saved worlds that humanity never even visited, peoples that humanity never even met, simply by making the predators afraid, for the first time in the long history of the dark, that the weak might not be alone. That is what they did. That is the true size of it. They did not just save Veth. They put a crack in the oldest cruelty of the galaxy, and through that crack, a little light got in everywhere all at once. I want to tell you what became of the ones in this story, before I tell you the end, because you have walked with them and you deserve to know. The human who sang on my beach at dawn, the one who stumbled through our evening song with its rough soft voice and its weeping strange eyes, that one stayed. Of all the humans who stayed, that one stayed the longest and became the closest to me, and I will not pretend otherwise. That human became my friend, my truest friend, across a gulf of species and worlds and ways of being that should have made friendship impossible. We were impossible friends, the singing human and we were friends for the rest of that human's life, which was shorter than mine, because humans do not live as long as my people do. A grief I did not see coming and that I carry still. But for the years we sang together every evening, the human and I, on the rebuilt beach, the evening song, the one that means the day is ending and we are still here and we are together, and that is enough. And it was enough. It was always enough. The commander, the tired old human with white in her hair who had said no price. She went home, eventually, with the war fleet, an honored hero of her people. But she came back. She came back to Veth many times over the years, and she grew older and we grew to love her. And when she died at last, very old, on her own blue and white world far across the dark, her people honored her wish and brought a part of her back to Veth, and we gave her to the tide, the way we give our own. She rests in our water now. A human commander, resting in the shallow seas of a world she crossed the dark to save. There is a song for her. We still sing it. I sang it just last evening before I came to tell you this. And Isa of the deep current, who built the call, who compressed a whole people's anguish and hope and dignity into a map and a horror and a song and 3 small words, and who was taken before she ever knew if the call was heard. Isa is not forgotten, could never be forgotten. Her name is the first name on the great memorial wall, set apart, set above all the others, because she is the one whose cleverness and whose stubbornness and whose refusal to accept the silence reached across all that dark and found the ears that answered. Every child on Veth knows the name of Isa. Every child knows that we were saved because one instrument maker would not give up on a salvaged machine, because one mind insisted that the question was worth asking even when asking seemed mad. She never knew it worked. Like Arrow, she died not knowing. But it worked, Isa. Across all the years and all the dark and all the silence it worked. I tell your name every time I tell this story, so that the working of it will never be forgotten. And now, old Arrow and the promise, and how I came to be called Teller, the end of it. You remember Arrow, the elder who stood up in the deep sanctuary in the 8th year of the cull, when most thought it madness, and argued that we should send the call. Who did not promise anyone would come, who said, in fact, that it would likely be no, but who said that the asking itself was worth it, that to still believe the question worth asking, against all the evidence, was perhaps the bravest thing a broken people could do. You remember that she died during the waiting, 3 years before the answer came, and that she died not knowing whether the dark was empty or not. And you remember her last song, sung to me in the dark water as the tide came to take her. The dark is very large, but it is not empty. I have to believe it is not empty. Promise me you will believe it too. And I promised. I promised an old dying woman, floating in the dark, that I would believe the dark was not empty, even though everything in my life had taught me that it was. And then for 3 years I kept that promise the only way I knew how, by going up to the high cliff in the dark hours, alone, foolishly, dangerously, and looking at the sky, and trying to still believe. It was the hardest promise I have ever kept. Belief, when belief is foolish, when every fact and every tide and every emptied beach says you are a fool to hope, that is the hardest thing. There were nights on that cliff when I could not do it, when I lay on the cold stone and could not, for all my trying, believe the dark was anything but empty and uncaring and waiting to swallow the last of us in silence. I kept the promise badly on those nights. I kept it the way a drowning creature keeps hold of a rope it no longer believes is tied to anything. But I kept it. I kept looking at the sky. And that is why I was on the cliff. That is why, of all my people, I was the one looking up when the dark tore open and the fleet poured through. Because I had made a promise to a dying woman to keep believing the dark was not empty, and I was up on that cliff in the dark hours keeping it, badly, desperately, when the dark proved her right. I saw it first because I was the one still watching. I was the one still asking the question. I was the one who had promised to believe. When the fleet came and the sky sang our songs back to us, and I lay on the cliff and wept and thought, Arrow, you were right. The dark is not empty in that moment. Something in me changed, and I knew what the rest of my life was for. I knew that Arrow had not just asked me to believe. She had asked me to carry it. To carry the belief, and then to carry the proof, and to give it to everyone who came after so that no one of my people would ever again have to lie alone on a cliff in the dark, keeping a foolish promise, not knowing if the dark was empty. I would tell them. I would tell them all. I would spend my life telling the story of the night the dark answered so that every child of Veth and every envoy of every other small frightened people who came to learn from us would carry the proof in their hearts from the very beginning. The dark is large, but it is not empty. Someone came. Someone will come again. You are not alone. You were never alone. Hold on. Keep asking. Keep believing. The answer is real. I saw it. I was there. That is how I came to be called Teller. Not for cleverness, not for courage in the battle. I did nothing in the battle but lie on a cliff and weep. I am called Teller because I took up old Arrow's last request and made it my life, to carry the story and to tell it, and to tell it, and to tell it, so that the belief she died holding would never again have to be held alone by one frightened creature on a dark cliff. Now it is held by all of us. Now it is carved over our doors and sung on our beaches and taught to our young before they can swim. The dark is not empty. It is the first thing a child of Veth learns now, and the last thing, and it is true. And I am the one who saw it be true, and I have told you so that you will carry it too. I am very old now. I have told this story 1,000 times, and I do not have many more tellings left in me. I can feel my last tide somewhere ahead, not close, but no longer so far that I cannot see it. And when it comes, I will go the way Arrow went, the way the human commander went, the way we all go in the end. I will let the tide take me back into the water that bore me, and I will not be afraid because I know now what Arrow knew, what she made me promise to believe, what I have spent my life proving true and passing on. The dark is very large, larger than any of us can hold in our minds. It is full of cruel things and cold things, and things that hunt the weak and the gentle and the alone. I will not pretend otherwise. The dark is dangerous, and the danger is real, and a great many beautiful peoples have been emptied into its silence and will be emptied still. But it is not empty. That is the thing I know, the thing I saw with my own eyes on a cliff in the dawn, the thing I have given my whole long life to telling. The dark is not empty. Somewhere out in it, there is a young and loud and lonely people who listen, who have always been listening, who waited their whole history to hear a cry, and who, when they finally heard one, did not calculate, did not hesitate, did not count the cost or weigh the risk or decide it was not their concern. They simply came. They filled up the sky. They sang our own songs back to us. They asked for nothing. They saved us, and then they stayed until we could stand. And then they became our family across all the impossible distance. And they taught a whole frightened galaxy the most important thing any of us will ever learn. That when you cry out into the dark, when you are weak and hunted, and certain that no one is coming, you should cry out anyway. You should ask the question anyway, even when asking seems mad, even when every fact says stay silent and be emptied. Because someone might be listening. Because the dark is very large. But it is not empty. We asked, and they came. And that is the whole of the story, and the whole of what I know, and the whole of what I have to give you before my own tide comes. Cry out, always cry out. Someone is listening. I promise,